All right, so transitioning temporary foreign workers to permanent residency is something that we're going to be talking about today. Before we get into the content of the presentation, why would you do it? I think is a big thing to look at as, as a business, to make as a business decision. I know that some employers seem to like the employer-specific work permits. It seems to tie the worker to their business once they're a permanent resident. Somebody can work anywhere in Canada or in any position. I'll just quickly speak from our own experience here on our farm. We've had foreign workers over the past. We currently actually have none. We currently do have 3 permanent residents that started at temporary foreign workers. And just as an employer, it's been, extremely rewarding to be part of that process, to see their family join them, then see them be able to buy a house and get settled in life here as, as a permanent resident, as a fully participating member of Canadian society. Whereas I think with temporary foreign workers, an underclass may be a big term, but there is a different class. So I think fundamentally, I do believe in transitioning temporary foreign workers to permanent residency. But that has been challenging, and so that's what we'll be discussing today. Just move through the slides here. So quick introduction, I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant since 2008. My husband and I have a dairy farm outside of Lacombe, Alberta. I don't milk many cows, but on Christmas Eve I do. I came to Canada as a teenager. My parents were self-employed farmers. And Immigration Care is my immigration consulting firm based in Red Deer, Alberta. And we specialize in employment-based immigration and agricultural migration to Canada. There's a team of 6 in our office right now. And we've also recently established Labor Solutions Canada, which is a recruitment service that we've recently launched. And before we get into the nitty-gritty, just a bit of a disclaimer: the information that I'm sharing is time sensitive and is really meant as general advice. It is not case-specific advice. This is going to be our agenda for the next hour. I won't spend too much time on that. We will take you through each of these sections. I do want to set the stage here and the changing landscape of immigration. There's been so many changes. I think everybody is aware of that. Even if you just turn on the news, there's immigration news stories on there. Maybe not daily, but definitely several times a week. And I think the one constant is the change. With all the changes, I feel that there's been an increased level of unpredictability that we now all have to deal with, whether we are, employers or whether we are the temporary foreign worker. There's a lot of pressure on IRCC, on the department, and largely they have, I would say, a numbers challenge or a numbers problem, and that they're trying to get a handle on. I think it's good for us to know as users of their systems to see what the challenges are and where some of these changes are coming from. So first of all, they have way more applications in the system than they have processing capacity. So they're trying to modernize their systems by implementing portals, some AI assisted processing to help with processing. Another one is, and it's been in the news more lately, the number of temporary residents that we have in Canada. I believe currently it's between 2 million to 2.5 million temporary residents. They consist of visitors, study permit holders, and work permit holders. Yeah, we have only a number of, for coming up here, we only have 500,000 new permanent residents that we're letting in. So those numbers simply don't align when you think of maybe not all 2.5 million want to become permanent residents, but I'm certain a big chunk of them do. And so there's the numbers problem that we have. And many of the temporary residents that we have are what we would call low-skilled or entry-level positions. And yet immigration has this pressure to focus on high human capital immigrants. So kind of, aligning those challenges is what they're faced with. I do see, especially since the pandemic, IRCC has become more responsive to economic needs, regional needs, humanitarian needs, and also public perception. I mean, look what was just been happening to the study permits when, the housing challenge has become more forefront and the study permits are being curbed and the system is being overhauled. I also put in the slide at the bottom just because I think it is, as a practitioner, very interesting, but it really illustrates that the changes have just been incredibly frequent. These are the number of temporary policies that were, announced over the past decade and a half, so to speak. And if you look, the trajectory is it's a steep incline. And I counted in 2023, we had 31 temporary policies public policies that were announced. And as of yesterday, I didn't check today, we had 6 announced so far in 2024. And in IRC's response to be more responsive, we have more what I would call boutique immigration program. They aren't the large programs like we had before, but very regionalized or industry specific that we see more and more of. So that's adding a challenge. And there's also been a real shift from that first in, first out processing to an invitation-based immigration or expression of interest-based models. They're kind of used interchangeably, those words. Again, with their numbers challenge that they've got going on, we've got program caps now, or we've always had program caps, but they're more being followed more closely and monitored more closely. And category-based selections is become more frequent, again, to be more responsive to what industry needs and what our economic needs are. And the modernization of our systems. I actually haven't counted, but I think I probably have anywhere between 5 or 10 different immigration portals that I'm accessing on a daily basis. And each application seems to be processed in a different portal. So that's been challenging. I know in 2025, IRCC wants to launch this new system that is supposed to have kind of all of that combined, which also means that they're not really investing in our current portals anymore because they're going to be phased out. So if there's challenges there, I don't think there'll be, unless it's something that they can tweak quickly. Otherwise, I don't think they'll be investing much money in those portals. And AI assisted processing is something, and we can touch on it later if we have more time, but it seems to be more frequent, especially in temporary application processing. So that kind of sets the landscape of, that it's challenging. It's challenging for us as users accessing the systems on behalf or with our temporary foreign workers, but it's also extremely challenging for IRCC to manage all those pressures and to put forward a functioning system. So we'll just do a quick overview here of the different permanent residency programs that we have. And IRCC has them in 3 main categories. Here I've listed some of the economic programs, and we also have family reunification programs and humanitarian programs. Generally for our temporary foreign workers, we would be using one of the economic streams. And when I first started doing this work, all we really had was, I would say, probably 2 of these. The federal skilled worker was their flagship program, and then the provincial nominee program. And now we have, I would say, a plethora of different systems. The regional ones, like the Rural Northern Immigration Pilot, I believe there's about 10 communities in that. The Atlantic Immigration Program, and the Agri-Food Pilot, which we'll talk about a bit more here in a little bit. I used to be able to know all the criteria when we had like 2 programs, and now even as a professional, I don't memorize the criteria anymore, but I do know how to use the systems. And when I do meet with clients, I will always just go back to the criteria just so that I'm not mixing it up with another stream. So that's been a real shift for me as a professional as well. And even the provinces, we'll talk about that a little bit later. The provinces would probably each have about 2 streams, maybe about 10 years ago. And now they have, I would say 5 or 10 for each province. Interestingly enough, I really want to talk about this announcement here that was made last week about Canada announcing 2 new immigration pilots to support rural and francophone immigration to Canada. The rural pilot is to be launched in the fall of 2024. From what I understand, it will be modeled on the rural and northern immigration pilot. And I think it has the potential to be very interesting to some of us here on this call. And the Francophone one, this is going to be a reoccurring theme that you will see even in this presentation. There is a large focus now from IRCC on increased Francophone immigration to communities outside of Quebec. So you will see that reoccurring theme, and even if you were at our last session, we talked about the Francophone mobility LMIA exempt work permit as well. So it'll be, I'm not surprised that such a program was launched considering the immigration objectives IRCC has set. And then we'll just quickly touch on some of these programs here. I think as an employer, if you're helping your temporary foreign worker apply for permanent residency, it is good to know about the different programs that are out there. And if let's say they're in a relationship with a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, if they could be sponsored by their spouse or common law partner, that is generally my first choice. It is probably one of the faster immigration program. They wouldn't have to do a language exam or a language test. So that's one to keep in mind if they are in a relationship with a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. The humanitarian compassionate stream. I have been hearing of some immigration representatives encouraging this program more and more. And this is really a program meant for people that do not meet the minimum criteria of any of the other programs, but there are compelling, and they need to be extremely compelling factors as to why they would be allowed to become a permanent resident anyway. If they failed their language test 2 or 3 times, that is not compelling. I've had clients come into my office, like I talked to somebody else and they recommended the HNC stream. Yeah, I'd be very wary of that before heading down that. It has the potential to lead to disappointment in that stream. We won't really touch on refugees. And then again, in IRCC's attempt to be responsive, they have many of these programs that have been launched for Ukrainians, those affected by the conflict in Sudan. There was also a family stream for Colombians, Haitians, and Venezuelans. That program has already reached its cap. So these kind of response or strategic initiatives are becoming more frequent, and it's good to be aware of them if you are employing people from any of these countries or communities. So before we consider which permanent residency stream would be the best fit, I advise that you take stock of a number of factors, and these would be the ones that stick out to me. And when I meet with a client, these are the things I look at right away. A big one is the type of work permit, and whether it's LMIA or LMIA exempt, because that permit may or may not make them eligible for certain streams. I would also be wary of open work permits. Find out under which stream that open work permit has been issued. For example, some refugee claimants will have been issued an open work permit, but generally those with a pending refugee application are not eligible for any other stream to apply for. So those are the kinds of things that you really want to take stock of in advance of going down this road. Another one that I really want to talk about is family members. So family members do become part of the permanent residency application, and family members include spouses or common law partners and children up to the age of 22 are considered dependents unless they're married, but otherwise they can become permanent residents along with the principal applicant. And their age is locked in at the date of application. So this sometimes puts some pressure on getting an application in if you know one of their kids is about to turn 22, but they'd like to come along on this application. This also right away ties into this inadmissibility piece. And also something to be mindful of, if any of the family members would be inadmissible, let's say criminally inadmissible, because of, well, we can pick on, whatever scenario, but if any of the family members are inadmissible, it actually makes all the applicants inadmissible. So that could lead to a refusal of the permanent residency application, something to be mindful of when you're embarking on this. And also previous applications, not just previous PR applications, but also previous work permit applications. You want to make sure that the information that you're going to be providing going forward is consistent. Inconsistency could lead to inadvertently or advertently misrepresentation, which could also be deemed potentially an inadmissibility. So it's very important. And with more AI assisted processing, these inconsistencies could be picked up more easily. So something to be mindful of as we're embarking on deciding what would be the best PR route for your temporary foreign worker. So now we'll take a more detailed look at the programs that in my practice I would use the most for agricultural employees. And I think as we go through it, it will become apparent which one is currently my favorite program. And we'll definitely spend some, an express entry and provincial nominee programs. They are daunting, they're confusing. So hopefully I can shed a little bit of light on how they work so that you can help your temporary foreign worker navigate these programs. So we'll start here with express entry. And IRCC is quick to say express entry is not a program. It is a system. It is a system to manage applications under these three programs: the Canadian Experience Class, the Federal Skilled Worker Program, and the Federal Skilled Trades Program. The temporary foreign worker must meet the criteria of one of these three programs before they can actually create what's called an express entry profile. If they don't meet the criteria, they will never be admitted into express entry. The Canadian Experience Class is probably the easiest program to meet. It really includes of 1 year of Canadian work experience and a CLB of 5 on a language test. The Federal Skilled Trades Program, I've used that for agricultural employees as well. As long as they've got 2 years of experience in that agricultural, they call it a trade, this agricultural occupation. And the language requirements are 5s and 4s, so it's a little bit lower than the Canadian Experience Class, and that's why sometimes it's come in handy. But it must be skilled work, so that's important to know. This is not meant for tier 4 or 5 employees. So once you've created your profile, you've put in all your information that relates to your age, your education, your work experience, whether you have a Canadian job offer, your language test results, and whether you have family in Canada, you will get what's called a CRS score, a comprehensive ranking score. And they base that score based on what immigration calls your human capital. In here is a link to the tool where you can assess what your foreign worker score would be. And profiles are active for 1 year. You can go in and update them. if needed, and there's no government fees to submit a profile. That's important to know. So just meeting, and this is where I think confusion exists sometimes with clients, is that just meeting the minimum criteria of one of these programs is not enough to be applying for permanent residence. You must still have what's called a high enough CRS score to be invited to apply. So that is what we're going to explain here in a little bit. So the express entry process, I've outlined it like this, where your first step is to create that profile. And again, you must meet one of those three programs. And sometimes we can skip number 2, and that is preferred if we can do that. And we'll skip over it now and I'll revisit it. And so then you wait for an invitation to apply. And once you get that invitation to apply, you have 60 days to actually submit the PR application. And once you've submitted that application, it's supposed to be processed in about 6 months. And I would say that is fairly accurate with what we are currently experiencing. However, express entry is portrayed as your application gets processed in 6 months, but we don't know how long step 1, 2, and 3 are going to take. So even though it might seem fast, if you never get this invitation to apply, it may not actually be fast. And so we're going to look at, what some of the CRS score that you would need to get an invitation to apply here in a couple of slides. But what some of them need, and this is where we go back to that step 2, if your CRS score is not high enough, you may need to supplement your profile and your human capital information with a provincial nomination certificate. Those certificates actually give you 600 points, which will make the applicant much more competitive in express entry. And we're going to talk about how to obtain one in a minute. But it's good to get this flow in your mind. It's first creating a profile, then waiting for an invitation to apply, and then submitting a PR application. It is possible that you will never get an invitation to apply, and then your profile just gets removed after 1 year. So as I mentioned, your CRS is based on a variety of factors, including age, education, language ability, and work experience, whether you have a job offer and family in Canada. So I just thought I would put this in and as a kind of a contrast to see who would be more competitive in this system. So here we have Joe. He's a farm supervisor. He's 35, has a high school education, CLB of 5, which is just the minimum score he would need to qualify for that Canadian experience class. He's got no French. He's been working here for a year, and he's worked 3 years as a farm supervisor outside of Canada. His employer will offer him a permanent position, and his brother is already a permanent resident here. His spouse has no formal education, no English or French, no notable English or French language ability, and no Canadian skilled experience. So he's at 247 points. Now let's meet Marie and compare his score to hers. She's single. She's also 35. She has a master's degree. She's got a pretty solid level of English and French, but she's never worked in Canada. She doesn't have any Canadian work experience or any Canadian job offer. And but she's worked abroad or outside of Canada as as an agronomist, as she's pictured there, and her brother is a permanent resident. She has 413 points. That's a massive contrast, and it's really comes down to that language ability and that education. There's a heavy focus in express entry on language ability. And even just by showing if Joe were to improve his language results to a CLB 6 or a CLB 7, especially the 7, the points jump up significantly. However, I would say that getting somebody from a 5 to a 7, I've not seen it happen with any clients that have taken a language test for a second or a third time. I do generally see them improve a little bit when they do it a second time, but that is a big jump. And you have to take note of that. The language test consists of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So it's got, it's not easy to then improve on all 4 components to that CLB 7 level. So it might not be realistic for Joe to get to that CLB 7. But imagine that he did, and then he got a provincial nomination, he would have 912 points. So that would potentially make him a lot more competitive in express entry. And this is where I'm going to go to the next slide here. And I show this to clients when I do their CRS assessment. And this is a print screen of the rounds of invitations to apply IRCC has done since September 27th of last year. So about 6 months worth of rounds of invitation. You can see at the top there that it says the number of invitations issued, and that column next to it is, the CRS score that they had. So, they just did a round here 2 days ago. A general round means they invite everybody who is in the pool, they don't put in parameters. And they issued 2,850 invitations, and the cutoff score was 525. So even Marie would not have been invited to apply under that one. However, 2 weeks ago, they did a French language proficiency draw of 2,500 people, and the cutoff score there was 336 points. This means that Marie probably would have been invited under that draw if she had included the intention to reside anywhere outside of Quebec. So that's really where this Francophone immigration and emphasis is going. It is really to encourage French-speaking individuals to move to communities outside of Quebec. That's written right in the Immigration Act, actually, to encourage French-speaking immigration. So I don't really foresee that there's going to be a big shift away from that. What you can also see in this list here is that there is a new trend, which they just started last summer, of category-based invitations to apply. In the past, they would just do a round that was just focused on clients or applicants that met the Canadian Experience class, or applicants that met the Federal Skilled Trades class. They're no longer doing that, as you can see. They are now being more responsive to what industry needs by doing industry-specific rounds. And you can see even the one they did for agriculture there on February 16th, the points were a bit lower. Actually, there weren't that many invitations issued if you compare it to some of the other rounds. Each of these categories has a specific set of occupations that will be considered. And I've just listed the ones here, and they're not codes that are on the agricultural category. So that's supervisors and horticultural and agricultural supervisors and butchers. So they would not be looking at somebody else that's maybe listing another code as their main occupation. So I find this very useful to see if somebody is going to be likely to get an invitation to apply or not. So going back to Joe, who had 247, or maybe a little bit higher if he gets improved language results, he very likely would not be picked here. So in his case, if he were my client, I would be looking at, okay, what province are you in? And could you boost your points with a provincial nomination? So the provincial nominee program consists of each province has their own PNP program with a set of sub-programs or streams. And some of them are linked to express entry, and some of them are not linked to express entry. So it's good to have that distinction. So for the ones that are linked to express entry, how do you get that that provincial nomination certificate? And each province has their own system of doing it. Generally, what you'd have to do is still create that express entry profile and then follow one of these 3 processes depending on what the province has determined. So I know Alberta and Ontario, for example, they actually reach directly into the express entry pool and pick candidates out of there based on their own criteria. And they sent what's called a notice of interest letter. With that, it's like an invitation. You are now allowed to apply to the province for provincial nomination. And once you get that provincial nomination, it actually loads, you can load that back into your express entry profile and get 600 points. Some of the other provinces have a different system. Some of them have a provincial expression of interest. So then again, it's almost like an invitation. You create a profile with the province and wait for selection. And if you are selected, you can apply for provincial nomination. And then once you've got that nomination certificate, you can load it back in. Or some provinces will allow you to just directly apply to the PNP. You don't have to wait to be invited. And then once you get the nomination certificate again, you can load it back into your profile. So the way that I explain this to clients is really you've got your express entry profile over here. And if you're engaging with the province, you really just park your profile, you deal with the province. Once you get your nomination certificate, you load it back into your profile. And from there, you will continue the PR application. So this is how, and again, you'd want to visit the provincial nominee website, nominee program website for the province that you're looking at to find out what their specific process is. So the non-express entry provincial nominee programs, again, each province has their own process and criteria. They all have sub-programs, and I have included a bit of an overview of roughly what it looks like per province, but honestly, each province has between 5 and 10 programs. So it's hard to put them all together. And it's also in my practice, I'm unable to really memorize the criteria of all of them because there's just simply too many. Another thing to note really is that each province has its own quota as well. I don't believe that the 2024 quotas per province have yet been released. And this has some provinces, including Alberta, put some of their programs on pause. Alberta's main program, the Alberta Opportunity Stream, has been put on pause. I don't fully know why, but my guess is that it's they're just waiting to see what their numbers are, and maybe they'll reopen the program. Again, this is my guess, in a few months with potentially with some tweaks again to manage volumes. Maybe they're switching to an expression of interest model as well. We simply at this point do not know. So that's, again, I'm really talking about Alberta here because that's, the program that I use the most. But even Alberta had launched a hospitality stream there, and it was actually closed a couple of days later because it had reached, a certain volume threshold. The provincial nominee programs are also of interest because most provinces do have streams for lower skilled workers, so tier 4 and 5 workers. Again, that's where many of your agricultural workers are now slotted into, like your farm equipment operators, your Hertz persons. They are now tier 4 workers, so they would probably be looking at some of these provincial nominee programs. Most provinces have generally the same criteria around education, which is often at least completion of the equivalent to Canadian high school, grade 12. There's a language requirement, usually a CLB 4 or 5. There's work experience. Some require 6 months in Canada or in the province, some 12. And there's typically a job offer requirement. And each province also has their own processing fee, just to put that out there. So just to illustrate what this process looks like, it's you apply for provincial nomination as your step 1, and if the province uses an expression of interest model, again, you must first have created a profile and be invited to submit that application. once you receive nomination, you can submit, or the temporary foreign worker can submit their PR application into the PR portal that IRCC launched a year or two ago. Just to compare, processing times for this stream currently are higher and then through express entry. The federal component, which is that component 3, is currently posted at about 12 months. I would say that is fairly accurate. And based on my experience, that has come down quite a bit. It was actually previously closer to 2 years, and over the past year and a half, that's come down quite a bit. So that's good to know as well. So here I've just created a bit of an overview of the different programs that are out there, and we won't go into any details because I simply haven't listed it. But all of them here show that they're linked to express entry in one way or another. And I've given you an idea of some of the interesting non-express entry programs. Like Ontario has a regional immigration program. British Columbia has a program for entry level and semi-skilled workers. And some Nova Scotia has an occupations in demand stream that includes tier 4 and 5 workers. And then some of the other Atlantic provinces, they all seem to be primarily linking to express entry through their own expression of interest system. And they either have their skilled worker or critical worker streams. Like the terminology is slightly different, but the fundamentals of it often come down to the same thing. But you'll just have to drill down in the criteria of each of the programs to make sure that the temporary foreign worker meets those criteria. And then here are some of the prairie provinces. And again, they're most of them require a job offer. There are some programs, I know Saskatchewan and Manitoba have some programs where the applicants would not require a job offer. Alberta also has a rural stream, and some communities participate in that and some do not. And I'm seeing more and more of that community-driven immigration, and the announcement that was made there on March 6th, again, is kind of feeding into that as well, where there's going to be more rural community-based immigration coming down either through provincial programs or right through a federal program. So that would come down to the Agri-Food Pilot Program. What I like about the Agri-Food Pilot Program is that you are not waiting for this invitation to apply. You submit your application, and unless the cap has been reached, or the annual cap for this program has been reached, your application will be processed. Which gives you a little bit more of that certainty that typically people want as they're planning their future in Canada. The criteria is fairly straightforward. They need to have 1 year of Canadian work experience in the last 3. And it has to be non-seasonal, and that's really the case for, I would say, all immigration programs. I don't think any of the provincial nominee programs would allow for that, but I stand to be corrected on that. It needs to be, and we'll go to this list of eligible occupations and eligible industries in a minute here, but that is a fundamental part. It does need to be an eligible occupation and an eligible industry for the application to be processed. The work permit must be an LMIA-based work permit, or the only open work permits they will allow is the one for vulnerable workers. So if you have somebody working at your operation who's got a work permit issued under the International Experience Canada program, or is the spouse of a study permit or a work permit holder, they will not be eligible to apply under this stream. They must first work for 1 year under this LMIA-based work permit. And the language proficiency is a CLB of 4. And there aren't really any programs that would have any lower language requirement than this. And there's been a big shift really in, and I think CARC was part of making this shift happen here, is to the requirements for outside Canada and inside Canada applicants. And I've highlighted it because we were promised that back in May or August of last year that it would be implemented by the end of 2023, but actually in February, this requirement of a permanent job offer or meeting the educational requirements is now in effect. To note about the permanent job offer is that it must meet the job bank's prevailing wage. So not the ag stream wage that you may have gotten your LMIA on. It must be the job bank's prevailing wage, which potentially could be higher. So that's important to note. I have seen actually some applicants where this wasn't the case. And I think the employer didn't realize this. And instead of returning the application, the officer actually emailed the applicant directly and asked about this wage and gave the employer the opportunity to update that. And that is generally the advantage of these pilot programs, is that there can be a bit more of a, I've heard IRCC officers call it white glove service, as to where they might, communicate with you a bit more instead of saying incomplete or, don't meet the criteria, and they return the application. And the education requirements are interesting also because it must be either Canadian high school or high school in home country. And this is different from every other stream. Every other stream, it has to be equivalent to grade 12 education. But as we know, in some countries, high school is completed at grade 10 or 11, and that is allowed under this particular stream. But the applicant must still obtain an educational credential assessment from one of the 5 organizations. And I didn't put a link in there to any of that. But if you Google education credential assessments designated organizations, you will find the 5 that are designated to do that. And outside Canada, applicants will need proof of settlement funds, and inside applicants if they're working in Canada, have a valid work permit. They do not need to have any proof of settlement funds. Processing times for this is pretty good. I would say most of them are processed that I've seen between, I'm going to say 9 to 12 months. So I think that's pretty good. You don't have to wait for an invitation to apply. You just have to be mindful of the program caps. They have redone the caps this year. In previous years, I've not ran into issues with the cap being reached because it was capped per industry. But now with the more relaxed requirements and the cap is for the whole program, I'd be interested to see if that cap is reached and if they will let us know. And maybe that's something CARC would be able to get that information from IRCC to see maybe where they're at in terms of that cap. And as promised, I was going to put in this slide about the eligible industries and occupations. So it's really eligible industries are the meat product manufacturing, greenhouses, and animal production. What's really missing here is crop production. I would like to see that be part of this list. And then the occupations there are listed as well. And I would say it includes all of your agricultural positions except for the management ones. I don't recommend, if you don't clearly meet this, to submit the application. As we talked about, immigration has has such a high volume of applications that truly they are, if you're putting in a discretionary application, I would say you're running high risk of it being returned. The volume is just simply, it's there. They don't need to be considering discretionary applications. So as we did a whirlwind through how Express Entry works, how the Provincial Nominee Program works, and the agricultural or agri-food pilot program, I think you have a pretty good idea of what my favorite program is. And currently, my program of choice when I meet with a client is first I go to the agri-food pilot. Again, I'm mindful of the NOC, the NAICS code, and the CAP. I think it's the simplest, fastest, and most dependable application stream. My second, and really it allows for lower skilled or semi-skilled applicants. My second choice generally is the express entry stream if it's somebody with skilled work experience. I assess their CRS and then I look at recent rounds of invitations to apply and then determine if we need a provincial nomination, and I would seek that out if needed to boost the CRS. And then my last one is looking at the provincial nominee programs. You'll have to assess the PNP streams that are there at the time. And really why it's my least favorite, it probably is because it has the most steps to it. And it is slower processing than some of the other streams. Another thing to take into consideration as an employer is to be mindful of when they're eligible to apply for a bridging open work permit. It differs per stream, per program. So you'd want to have a look at that when they're eligible, so that obviously your worker does not fall out of status. Having a pending PR application does not keep somebody in status. A worker must still maintain temporary status to be able to work. And then my last slide here on some takeaways that I want to part with before we leave some time for some discussion or some questions are really the following. And the first one is to plan ahead. So I would say when you're hiring foreign workers, look at whether they will be able to meet or are likely to meet PR criteria, focusing on where they're at in terms of education and language ability is a big one. Somebody who speaks next to no English or French is very unlikely to be scoring a CLB 4 or 5, even 2 years down the road. I am sure there are exceptions to that, but that is my general experience. And retain documentation, and like I said earlier, consistency is important. Misrepresentation becomes an issue. So if somebody has said in previous applications that they were a laborer, and on your application they're saying they were a supervisor, that is going to cause some issues. So to be mindful of that. Secondly is to keep up to date with the programs that are out there, and the changes that are there. And kind of regret saying this, almost like accept a level of uncertainty. But I say this to people who want to immigrate to Canada also, like immigration is, inherently it's got uncertainty. And many people want that level of certainty. It simply cannot be given until they're a permanent resident. It is not there. So when hiring temporary foreign workers, it's important to accept that there is this uncertainty component to it. Thirdly, as we've already seen in the last 45 minutes, a temporary permanent residency can be taxing, and we didn't even really go into how to do it. We just talked about the programs, but even how to do it and accessing the portal, setting up a portal. If somebody is not very tech savvy, it is not easy. So assisting the temporary foreign worker where needed, whether it's a technical challenge and documentation, I advise that you are available to them and to help them navigate through it. Some employers make language training available. They help with that educational credential assessment if needed. They can be quite challenging to obtain. So again, assistance in just navigating those processes is sometimes actually critical. Otherwise, it simply won't happen. Number 4 is to be adaptable and patient. even if you have in mind this foreign worker could be applying for permanent residency by the end of their 2-year work permit. Maybe that is not the case. Maybe the program they wanted to apply for is capped, or they're not getting this invitation to apply. So consider extending the temporary foreign worker. You may need to apply for another LMIA. Something else to consider is offering a promotion if obviously the duties align with what's on the knock and what the foreign worker will actually be performing. Considering a promotion to maybe an occupation that is eligible, or finding year-round employment if they're a seasonal worker that you really want to keep. So considering that. And then lastly, and this is where I want to leave it with, and IRCs has increasingly become more receptive to economic and industry needs. I mean, the agri-food pilot program in and of itself speaks to that. As employers, advocate, use your industry association or CARC to voice what you as an employer need, what your temporary foreign workers need. And really at all levels, and that is, your federal immigration programs, your provincial immigration programs, and increasingly more so these municipal ones. And I've talked to many municipalities here in Alberta, and some are extremely engaged and want to offer solutions to employers and temporary foreign workers, and some are very hands-off, and they're like, no, this is not a municipal issue. We will not be touching immigration. But if you as employers bring this to a forefront, whether with a counselor, an economic development officer, I really advise that you become vocal for what your industry needs and what your foreign workers need. And that is really where I want to leave it with.